Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Guidance from Gratitude's podcast. Thank you for tuning in today. And I have the special treat of having a dear friend, Lisa Espinosa, with me today. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, Robbie. I'm so excited and honored to be here with you today.
I appreciate you coming and sharing your beauty with everyone. uh, Lisa and I met. I know I talk about this class a lot, but it was a very meaningful meaningful class to me. But I took a weekend mastermind with Radley Valentine. I guess it was 3 years ago almost, and I met some very significant people in that, and Lisa is one of those. And since then we've become friends and colleagues and have worked on a couple of like workshops and things together, and hopefully a retreat in Mexico sometime. which we'll talk about later. But I was just drawn to Lisa because she just exudes love, and so I wanted more people to meet her and hear about her journey and her practice and get to know her. So, Lisa, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? How did you start your spiritual journey, and like just give us a little of your history?
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have to say, yeah, that class we took together was so special, right? It felt like we didn't even know it, but we were all answering this call to meet each other. So I'm so grateful that we found each
Absolutely.
other that way. My spiritual journey, I would say it's interesting because I'm working on my second book and it's turning more into a memoir. So I've really been thinking about this a lot. And I really feel for me, it started in childhood. I mean, I wouldn't have called it that, but I was very much drawn to what back then the word God was my word. And it was like to God and feeling like I had this important mission. I mean, I remember even as a little girl, just lying in bed and having conversations and thinking like, okay, how am I going to help people? What am I here to do? I just was really, really, that just was very innate in me. And, I started reading. Because back then my parents were Catholic. That's the religion I was born into. What I understood as spirituality was like, okay, you go to church. And I remember going, and my parents were lapsed Catholics, so they didn't go to church every Sunday, but I literally would wake up in the morning, wake up my little brother, and walk myself to church with my brother because I thought, oh, there must be something special about church. I'll go there and I'll be able to talk to Jesus. I was really into Jesus. I still am. Of course, my understanding of him is very different now. But I was frankly disappointed. I would go to church and kind of be like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And so I think since childhood, I was very much felt I had a mission to share love and to bring healing to the world. And I believed in a God that was benevolent and loving. But that was that. And then as I got older, really was faced with more of the dogma of religion and kind of became involved with this group for which I won't name specifics, but for 7 years, that was a very like image of God as very like judgmental, and you had to follow these rules, and certain people were gonna be loved by God, but other people weren't. And even though it didn't make sense to me because I always have felt God was so loving, I was immersed in this world for 7 years. I know now that was part of my spiritual, curriculum journey that I had to go through. And it was very confusing. And that was the 7 years where it was really like, okay, I'm a sinner. I'm a bad person. I have to like, atone, suffering is part of how you prove yourself. All these like old things, which again didn't fully make sense to me, but also I was surrounded by all these people who this is what they believed, right? And so that was a really challenging time until I finally kind of got to a point where I was like, wait, I need to leave this. And that was really traumatic, the leaving of it, right? Because, and I think that's one of my biggest initiations was these people that I loved and trusted at the time, but then me listening to my soul and saying like, no, I don't believe your version of God. Like that does not make any sense to me. But I know if I separate from you, it will mean there's not a gray area for them. It will mean
Yes.
that's it. I'm turning my back on family, really. And so I went, it was an excruciating time for me to like just go back and forth, like, okay, am I following my soul? Is this the right thing? Or is this evilness trying to like get me off this path? You know, all of the
Temptation.
things, exactly,
Yeah,
temptation, because of course that's the language they use. Oh, you're just being tempted by
exactly.
whatever. And so that leaving was awful. You know, it was
Yeah.
incredibly traumatic. I not only did people I loved and had lived with for so long turn their back on me, but they started to, you know, say slander me basically. So it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely an attack. It was like leaving a cult, really was.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very challenging. And I think that took several years for me to recover, you know, to really, I think that was still questioning myself. And it was from a Christian perspective. So that's what then initiated me to be like, in that moment, turn away from Christianity and be like, okay, I need to find other spiritual paths, right? And that's when I, you know, started reading about Buddhism and Sufism and Hinduism and all these different other spiritual paths. And for a while was like, no to Christianity, just kind of like, you know, it was like I just had to remove myself from that. And I'm so grateful for that time because I just immersed myself in the divine feminine, right? The divine feminine goddesses, these other teachings, and eventually came back to like, you know what? There's many paths, and then I reconnected with mystical Christianity in the form that that wasn't
Resonated
um
with you.
yeah, that resonated with me.
Yeah.
That wasn't all the judgment and that stuff, but it was like, oh yeah, here's ascended master Jesus who I knew
Yes.
and loved. Here's Mother Mary, who was this amazing priestess that I can trust and connect with, right? So
This was
that
who I
was
was
that.
walking to church to go find when I was a little girl, but couldn't find in that building because what I was being
Exactly.
told.
Exactly. And
So I love
and
that you had the inner strength to separate and know that you had to do this. And I just feel like that's something that so many people have such a struggle with, that with the there are beautiful things about religion, but
Mhm.
when you're being told how to live or and not allowed to explore on your own, that's where we get into this area that's not healthy. So
Yeah.
I love that you were able to recognize that and take some really difficult steps to make sure that you're taking care of yourself. And a lot of people have struggle with that. So thank you for sharing that, because that could help people realize that reconciling those two things, it takes years. I had the same experience. Grew up Southern Baptist. My father was a Southern Baptist minister of music, and was in church 5 or 6 times a week. And this is how it's done, this is what you believe. And for years, it took me years to get back to being able to like say, oh wow, I can talk to God, I can have my own beliefs, I can. So thank you for sharing that story.
Yeah, thank you I mean, I really didn't know I was going to share that story, but thank you for providing the space for that because that is such an important part of, I think people see me now and sometimes assume, oh, I was just, always this open into everything. And I had definitely had that deep longing in my heart, but I went through some really intense things to free myself from it. And I have so much compassion for people who are in that and understanding how challenging it is, right? Because
Absolutely.
you're like I said, there were people that I really loved and cared about that to this day there's no relationship, there's no conversation, there's no so that was really challenging, but ultimately was absolutely what I needed to do. It was absolutely what led me to this point now. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I know right now you have your spiritual practice, and I want you to tell us a little bit about that. But what kind of careers did you have before you stepped into your spiritual service?
Yeah. So I was a middle school teacher here well, not here. I'm in Mexico now, but I was like, I was born and raised in Chicago. My parents were Mexican immigrants. And so in Chicago, I worked in the Chicago public schools. and I was a
Mhm.
seventh grade teacher, so middle school teacher, and it was work absolutely that I loved. Now it was exhausting for sure, but it was totally part of my dharma and the work I was meant to do. Teenagers always hold a special place in my heart because my teenage years were very traumatic. There was a lot going on. And so even though a lot of people, when I tell them, remember your seventh grade year, or they're like, oh my gosh, seventh grade, it could be such a intense time. And many
Yes,
teachers do not want to teach that grade. For me, it was like, it was my calling to be with seventh graders through that phase, right? Where they're not little kids, but they're not adults. There's so much going on inside of them. There's so much they're questioning. There's so much awkwardness, so much power at the same time. And I did that, taught science and language arts for about 10 years. And it was, again, it was very, even though it wasn't spiritual, it was service based, right? When you're a teacher, it's like,
absolutely.
it was absolutely giving. And then I got to a point where, there were actually a lot of very exciting things happening for me as a teacher. I had gotten my master's. I'd been awarded this prestigious teaching award in Chicago. I had written chapters in education journals. So it was really like my career was at its height, like, ta-da, like all these doors were opening. And yet I was like, why am I not happier? Like, why am I feeling dissatisfied? Like, literally, there's all these amazing things happening. And I share this in my first book, this story. I remember I was teaching language arts and I was walking around the classroom, when you're teaching seventh graders, you really need to be present the whole time.
Yes.
But even
Yeah.
with that, I had this like out of body experience, which must have taken a split second or something, and I was watching myself teach the class. And then I clearly heard this voice, which I know was the voice of my soul, say, your time here is done. And I was
Mm.
like, in that moment, I felt two things at the same time. It was, I felt so much relief and joy, like, oh, that's why I've been feeling like this. And then I
Yeah.
felt incredible panic and terror because I was like, what does that mean? Like, I'm literally at the height of my career. This is my, like, what does that mean? So got back in my body, continued with my day. But because people, when I share this story, people always ask me, well, what made you take that voice seriously? Because I think a lot of people have messages like that and then they ignore them or they don't. And I say that again with a lot of compassion. But for me, when I look back, I realized, I had started yoga a year before. I had started my daily meditation practice. It was just because I would wake up with so much anxiety. I just was like, okay, I need to meditate every day, even though it means waking up earlier, all of the things. I'm a mom also. At that point, my kids were, little. They still needed
Yeah.
a lot from me. And I think it was because I had had that mindfulness practice and because I had had that experience I shared with you earlier of leaving, I had had already that muscle of, wait, I'm going to pay attention to this, even though it scares me and it feels very hard. I really sat with that and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm being guided to leave, to walk away from this very successful career that is at its height in a lot of ways. Makes no logical sense. And that's what, that was at the beginning of the school year. So I was going to teach that whole year still. But that was then the beginning of the end of that career. Yeah, of
It was
leaving
that
that.
tipping point where you just knew you knew you had to follow that voice. And I
Absolutely.
think it's such an important thing for people to know. Even, you know, the conversations I'm having are with practitioners, but you can apply, anyone can apply this to their lives and just following that voice and that inner voice. And, you and I, angels. And so Archangel
Mhm.
Haniel helping to step in and listen to your intuition, trust yourself is such an important part of this process. And knowing what's ego based and what isn't, and just that it came through so clear and pure to you, that
Yeah,
experience, that you couldn't deny it and your mind wasn't
exactly.
trying to manipulate it. It came from a heart. And I love that you were doing service, like in as a teacher you were doing service because you were holding space for all those kids to be who they
Mhm.
were and allow them to grow and learn and develop. And while you were there, you know. So
Mm.
that's another beautiful thing. So that was something like what kind of led you into spiritual work, but you were already doing it,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't conscious, you know,
Yeah.
like you knew what you were doing, knew why you were doing it, what that great and everything. But it's like I love that you were already developing and doing this, because that's what you do for people in your sessions is you hold space for them and allow them to grow and allow them to see what's going on and make those recognitions. And you know,
Yeah.
so, and that's just because of who you are. And you know,
Mm.
the beauty, again, I'm going back to the beauty and love that you just exude. I wish people could see you. So,
Oh, thank you, Robbie. Yeah, I mean, I really look back on those years of teaching seventh grade, and you're right. I use everything in my sessions now because, I mean, from creating curriculum, from creating a safe space, and the fact that as adults, we have an inner teenager. We have our inner teenagers that feel awkward at
oh boy.
times or that rebel, that, like I really, in a lot of ways, feel like I'm still working with teenagers, like my own, first of all, my own. But then also, and I say it very lovingly because I think our inner teenagers are so powerful. And if we can harness that energy, I mean, that's such a gift. But also, teenagers can be moody and can feel completely overwhelmed by the world. So, everything I learned as a teacher, I absolutely apply every day to the classes I teach, to the work with my clients. Yeah. And I say that to all, even if you're listening to this and you're not service based right now, but you're wanting to go into a spiritual field, whatever it is, you will use it now. If it's marketing, if it's, I had a client who was an FBI agent once. I mean, like, what? How did that happen? But everything, her training, I was like, oh my gosh, like literally everything is a gift. Everything is part of our life's training. And so it's really important to look at our life in that way, like, oh, okay, wait, what is the training of my life? What did everything I experienced help to turn into medicine?
Well, it's that thought that every step you take, you're, you know, trusting that you're on the right path, and the things that you experience and learn along the way aren't mistakes. You know,
Yes.
like you can take things, like, you know, I, in the last thing I recorded, I shared I used to do desktop publishing, and then I worked at a PR firm, and then, you know, I so I learned all these skills that I can apply to my business now to do promotions. And I worked, you know, produced concerts as a volunteer for years, the Seattle Folklore Society. So I learned how to produce events. And so everything that I've done, even though it doesn't look like a straight road, you know, it's like bendy, wavy, you know, can be a little jolting sometimes with all the things I've done, but they led me to where I am. And so
Absolutely.
you trusting the path, trusting it's not going to look the same for everybody. Sometimes people will just show up and boom, there they are. But others, it might take longer. And because there's things, you know, you learn along the way, they're going to allow you to do it when you're ready. So trusting.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so glad you're bringing that up because I think that's one of the things I see that's the biggest struggle, right? It's that what you just said is trusting the line, the path, even though it's meandering. And, once I left teaching, my first job was at a fertility clinic. I mean, I would have never, if you would have told me in 100 years I was gonna go do Reiki energy healing at a fertility clinic, I would have been like, wait, what? Like it, but that now I look
Cool.
back on those years that I was there and I'm like, oh my gosh, that was such an important part of my journey. But in the
Yeah.
moment, I was kind of like, is this part of my journey? But again, I had to keep following that nudge forward, even though my ego mind, my logical mind was kind of like, wait, where is this going? Why am I
Yeah.
here? And so I think it's so important, yeah, for everyone to remember that it doesn't, our soul has such a high perspective. It knows, right? It knows, like it knew those 3 years you're going to be at that fertility center are going to be key. And from my
Mhm.
limited perspective, it felt somewhat illogical and somewhat like, wait, this wasn't my longing to do, even though, of course, it
Yeah.
was very beautiful work. And now it makes perfect sense. Of course, now I'm like, oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah. That's great. I love that.
Yeah.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now? What
Yeah.
services you offer? You just made you took a leap of faith and followed your voice, or that your inner voice
Yeah.
and soul to make a major move from Chicago to Mexico. You mentioned it a little while ago, but that has been a big transition for you this past year. And but what services are you offering now?
Yeah. So what was so interesting, right after I left teaching, I was kind of like, yeah, what services am I offering? Right. And it was a meandering path. I worked at the fertility clinic, and that was really a training to open up my intuition and start to trust that. And as that happened, people just started coming to me for, I didn't call it coaching then. It was just like they would come for Reiki sessions. But as I was doing Reiki on them, it was also like, it wasn't just Reiki, it was having a conversation beforehand and, really helping them sort through their emotions and listen to their soul's guidance. Again, in the moment, I didn't call it that. I was just like, okay, people are coming. I really feel like before they get on the Reiki table, we need to talk. And I really feel like at the end, we should talk again. And as that started happening, the people that started coming to me were mostly service-based, right? Coaches, therapists, nurses, and it was like I was having the same conversations over and over, just kind of about listening to their soul's guidance to evolve the work they were doing. And I did that for about 4 years, just this kind of didn't have a label. It was like Reiki practitioner, right? But then
Yes.
at that point, I wasn't making enough money. I know it was just like I was working so hard, but it was that part was still very challenging. And I was like, what is it that I'm missing? And I knew I just, I was a teacher before. I was not a business person. I didn't know about business and marketing. And so in my meditation, I remember I got a clear message. I needed to hire a business coach, someone who was understood the world I was in, someone that I trusted, a woman. At that point, I was like, I want to work with a mom, whatever. Anyway, and I was led to the right person. And I remember she asked me, she was like, okay, Lisa, you're doing a lot of great things, but we want to focus you. And then she asked me, she's like, tell me about all the clients that have come to you. What is the one thing that if you could shout it from the rooftops, you would do all day long that you just love talking to your clients about? And I was like, I love talking to my clients about the work they're meant to do in the world, about their soul's calling, about and I love talking to women and men who are sensitive, who have a prayer to improve the world, who have had mystical experiences. They want to talk about angels and all of this stuff. And she was like, okay, you're like a spiritual career coach. And I was like, okay. I had never thought of that, but I was like, because I was like, well, career coach, people think of like resumes and networking, and that's not
Yeah.
what I do. She's like, no, no, no. She's like, I'm getting the picture of what it is you do. And so then it became clear to me, like, oh, yeah, this is what I help people do. Like, this is what I love to help people do. And of course, that means, working with those parts of you that come up that get scared, that don't trust it, that are like, wait, I'm not enough, or I need more training, or do people really need my services? There's so many coaches out there doing this already. All the doubts that come up, which I understood
Yes.
perfectly because I'd gone through all of that. And I was like, and through a combination of energy healing, I also have training in internal family systems model of psychotherapy. I know that's super long, but it's parts work. Basically, the idea that we have our inner child, our inner teenager, we have all these parts inside of us that are our allies, but they also hold trauma. And so that's what I do with my clients. I help them navigate that so they can listen to their soul's guidance and share what I call their unique soul's medicine, right? Share it with the world and the way they're meant to share it. And again, most of my clients are, body workers, therapists, coaches, but I also have had other clients, anyone who's drawn to my work is welcome,
Yeah.
but definitely a lot of times it's those people who are also spiritual entrepreneurs or wellness entrepreneurs, there's very unique challenges I think that come up in that with us in that group. I think it can get very this desire to be of service can really be taken over by codependency and lack of boundaries, and navigating that with compassion. Like, yes, I want to be of service. Yes, I love humanity. Yes, I have so much to give. And I need to be blessed as I do this work. I think can be a really hard journey. and why a lot of people stop, even if they have the courage to begin, then they're like, forget it, I can't do this, it's overwhelming, I'm carrying all of my client stuff. And so that's what I do, and with my clients, and I love doing that work. And and as you know, I also teach classes, connecting with ascended masters. It's all connected. It's all really revolves around the same thing.
Yeah. And what is your website, Lisa, so people can go
Yeah.
and find your services? And
Yes, it's very easy. It's my name, lisaespinosa.net. And just to spell that out, because often people misspell that. So it's all S's, lisaespinosa.net. And yeah, you can find everything there. I have a YouTube channel, but the link to that is there, and a podcast that I recorded a few years ago. But yeah, that would be the place to go to find out more.
on Facebook, you do a weekly session, free weekly
Yeah,
session. Let's talk about that for a
absolutely.
minute, because I know
Yeah.
I tune in when I can.
Yes, yes, thank you. So yeah, weekly, it's simulcast on YouTube and Facebook, and it's called a Rise Up and Share Your Soul's Medicine. And so every week on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock, but of course the replays are available. And it's about 30 minutes, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. And it's really just kind of like this, I think of it as a time to reconnect with your soul, receive from your soul, because the temptation to not do that is so strong in the world, right? It's like we have so many things to do. We're parents, we're partners, we have so much going on. And so to tune in, realign, reconnect, and just really know, okay, what is the next right step? Like, what is the next
Mhm.
step for me to do? We can get so overwhelmed, but it's like tuning in, like, okay, what's the next step? Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a phone call you need to do, maybe it's usually it's something way simpler than we think it's going to be, but we still have
Yeah.
so much resistance. We're like, oh, I'm going to have to create a website. I'm going to have to do this. And there will be a time for that. But in the day to day, your soul's guiding you through what's the next little step? What's the next little step to take? So I share lots of teachings and really practical things. My goal with that is that you take something that you can implement right away. That it's like, okay, not only was this inspiring, but there's something here that I can go and implement so I can share my medicine with the world, because it's needed right now more than ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I love that, you mentioned just saying, like, taking the next step. And I've shared this several of the podcast episodes, because I think it's so important, is just that message of saying yes. You don't, you, but that requires us to surrender
Yes.
control and fear and doubt and all of that, just to be able to say yes and take that next step forward, to be able to. And like you said, it could be as simple as sending an email, or something that you've been putting off because you just have had that anxiety about doing it. Um, but just saying yes, and releasing it. You might get a no back. Something might not ever come of it, but you never know. That seed could be planted for the future, and it comes through later. And you're like, okay, by saying yes and doing that, this opportunity came 6 months later. That's fine. You might not see the direct results, but just saying yes and it's that forward movement keeps you from being stuck too.
Yes, absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because it is. That's why I say following your soul is courageous. It's so
Yes.
courageous. It's so revolutionary, really. It's a radical act, because people will think, oh, it's self-indulgent, or that's for naive people, or it's woo-woo. But it is courageous and brave to listen to
Mhm.
your soul and take that action and feel the fear and do it anyway, right? Because yeah, you might be
Yes.
shaking in your boots and be like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is the right thing, but you're going to do it. And that builds that muscle of faith. And so, yes, absolutely. I think it's that next little step. And when you said that, I remember when you sent me the email to inviting me to do this podcast. And I remember I was meditating and I got the email. And of course, I love everything you do. So that wasn't the question, but I was like, you know how you can get into the panic of time. I was like, but I have so much going on. But I was sitting on my meditation cushion, and as soon as I tuned in, my soul was like, yes, this is a yes, this is a yes. Just take that little step of emailing right back. And I did. I was like,
Yeah.
emailed it right back. And then I was like, meditate. So
Hey, well,
yeah.
I'm glad you said yes, because I adore you and the work that you do. And you just have such a positive, loving spirit that you share, and it just exudes. I really encourage people to tune in. Is it Wednesdays that you do that?
Yeah, Wednesdays at
It
2.
is on
And
demand. It is on
yeah,
demand
yeah, and
too.
it is, yeah, it is on replay. So if you miss it live, and just for you, because sometimes people have a hard time finding me on Facebook, I guess because it's a business page. It's Lisa ESP 23, which I think is really ESP is the first three initials of my last name, but it also sometimes people
Uh,
think it's ESP like extrasensory perception, but it's like so
oh
Lisa
yeah.
ESP 23. That's my Facebook page.
Well, I can
And you could
tag.
also,
I'll tag it in
yeah,
the post too, so
absolutely,
people can
yeah,
find you.
that would be
Because
great.
I just encourage people to go and watch, watch some of those, and tune in when you can,
Yeah,
because you're always so generous in answering questions and commenting, when
yeah,
people comment stuff. But so yeah, I guess, I mean, we've covered a lot of, kind
yeah.
of that tipping point into stepping into service. You just heard it and followed it. And it sounds so easy, but I
Mhm.
know it's not. I know it's it's a challenge to do that. But because I had the same experience after the mastermind, it was like I knew I had to, and I was scared to death to do it because I always wanted to be a behind the scenes person. And I also think, you talked a little bit about trauma and those experiences, and helping people move beyond that trauma so they can step into service. And I think that past life experiences and experience in this life kind of sometimes keep us small and want to keep us kind of hidden. And so and I feel like those people that have those experiences probably are the ones that are going to be called later on to step beyond that, to share their story, to share their light, and share the strength that they actually have for having gone through these experiences that have been traumatic or challenging, and seeing the beauty in that, ultimately
Yeah,
seeing the beauty, and just stepping beyond being defined by an experience. Even,
yeah. I
it's
love
so
that.
powerful when someone steps into their power and not
Yeah,
let others define. So,
yeah. I'm
you
so
know,
glad you shared that, Robbie, because I often think that yeah, like you said, it's precisely those people that are not looking for the limelight, right? That are not like that might feel so intimidated by it, so intimidated by being what I call your soul spotlight, right? Of being in the spotlight, that are the people that are actually being called to come forward. And I love that you brought up past lives, because I didn't even mention that before, but that's one of the things I so help my clients with, because yeah, so many of us that are drawn to this work, we've done this in past lives, right? We've been medicine men, medicine women, priestesses, shamans, all of that. And a lot of those lifetimes ended very tragically, right? There's been a
yeah.
persecution of that. So we carry that memory in ourselves. So it is, I never want people to think that I'm saying, oh, it's so easy, just kind of jump and the net will appear. It's like, it's
Yeah,
hard. That's why I say it's brave and it's courageous. And
absolutely.
absolutely. And I think sometimes people see me because I do so many things in front of the camera now and think, oh, that's just easy for her. She's just such a natural. But first of all, I encourage you to go to my YouTube channel and look at the first videos I ever did like 3 years ago. And I look at them and I'm like, oh my gosh, I've actually thought of deleting them, but I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to delete them because I want people to look and see, I was awkward. I would say a lot. My background was very weird. I rambled on. I'm not saying I'm perfect now by any means, but it was challenging. And I used to be so shy. Like I had, body dysmorphia, and I hated my voice and seeing myself. And so I really want people to understand, like, all of those things, like you said, are part of what we end up overcoming and become part of our medicine, right? That you, Robbie, I've told you this before, you're so grounded and yet also so tapped into the divine, right? And that's a really hard combination to find in the spiritual world. I think there's a lot of like, oh, kind of like really floaty up there, but you're
Floating
very,
out there.
very,
Yeah.
yeah, but you're very grounded. You have such an open heart, and yet at the same time, yeah, you're so divinely aligned to a lot of really high level multidimensional energies. And so And you having to go, I remember the class and you being like, oh gosh, the class we took together. And it was like, I need to go in the front of the camera. And I could see that you were like, but you followed that guidance. And I could right away, I was like, oh my gosh, people so need the medicine Robbie has to offer. Like people
Well,
who
thank
would
you.
never receive it from someone else, that you're the one for them. Right. And so, yeah, I want everybody to hear that it's like, oh, you're the challenges, the parts that feel really hard, the parts that feel like, wait, I can't overcome this. That's going to become the medicine. That's the treasure. That's
Yeah.
what people are looking for. So thank you for
Yeah.
bringing that up.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that you saying that. I really do. It I feel like people find the person they're supposed to work with, and it doesn't have to be forever. Like teachers
Exactly.
come in and out of your lives for a reason when they meet
Mhm.
you where you are. And
Mhm.
so, that's why I love doing this series so people can discover new practitioners that are just, doing their work and really like there to assist people. And like you said, it's not that spotlight. They're not looking for the spotlight. They're looking to bring in the healing and the support that people need to work through whatever it is they're going through. And you are certainly someone doing that. So I
Mm.
appreciate it. You taking the time to have this conversation with us today.
I was gonna say thank you so much, Robbie. And I just really want to thank you for something I didn't mention. It's like I think you have such a generous medicine of bringing healers and practitioners together. Not everybody has that. And I think that's one of your gifts that you bring. You're like a connector. It's not just about, oh, your offerings and your clients and your students, but you really just love bringing people together and shining that loving spotlight on others. And that's so generous. And that's such medicine because we've had a lot of trauma in this world of practitioners and healers, and there can often be competition and jealousy and all sorts of things. And so I just am so grateful that you're doing this, not just for me, but for the collective of healers and wellness professionals and all of that. So thank you so much.
Like I said, it's so important for people to find the right person to work with because my energy might not be the right thing for somebody. I'm gonna call you out on your stuff and make you like, okay, what are you doing to make this change? Like you can ask for all the assistance in the world from God, the angels, whatever your words are. But if you're not working and bringing in, the change that you need and taking the steps, nothing's going to happen. But somebody else might need a little more love and hand holding and pampering that I'm going to be give them. So
Exactly. Yes.
a
There's
little
someone for
blessed.
everyone.
Exactly. But so everybody check out Lisa on her website. You can find her upcoming workshops and her Facebook page. I will put links to all of those things down in the post so you can find her. Again, she does her weekly gatherings and they're really beautiful messages. And she normally has a focus that she talks about. And but I just Lisa, appreciate you so much. And you're like I said, you just exude love. And every time I'm connected with you or we chat, I just always feel so much lighter and so much better after speaking with you. So thank you for all you do and for following the call and to step into service to share this with clients. And you also are that of practitioners and supporting them through their journey. I feel like we do similar things that way. I've seen people step into service and you support you supporting people that are in service. So I love that kind of have that complementary path too. So Lisa, thank you again for coming and chatting with us today. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing your journey and your love with everyone that listened today. I'm sure they could feel it.
Thank you so much, Robbie. And I'm sending everyone who's listening so much love and blessings on their path.
I'd like to thank Lisa for spending time with me today, and thank you for listening to this podcast episode. If you've missed any of the previous podcast episodes, you can find them on my website, robbiekearns.com. if you'd like to learn more about Lisa and the services she offers, you can find her website at lisaespinosa.net. And I will be sharing her social media pages in the comments and on the podcast page. You can find them there. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a wonderful, wonderful day. And thank you for listening. Bye-bye.